it's easy to forget that these are stories of real people. Somebody's mother, somebody's child, somebody's brother, somebody's daughter, somebody's father. Now, just like the silver ball in a pinball machine, things bounce in all kinds of directions. This is a story where the participants interact directly and indirectly with many other major events and major players in Cherokee history. Real life and real history is not Disney-esque. Things don't always end up in a pretty little package. There is no shiny bow. There are stories with no winners and no happy endings, and this is one. In 1740, Jane Gillespie was born in North Carolina and lived in Guilford County. In 1761, she married James Brown in Guilford. He was a native of Ireland who immigrated as a child with his parents, and he served in the Revolutionary War. In 1785, the U.S. entered into a treaty with the Cherokee, referred to as the Treaty of Hopewell. James, based on his military service, was awarded bounty land. And the bounty land was in the Cumberland area of what is now Tennessee, what later became known as Hyde's Ferry, or at the mouth of White's Creek. They picked out their land. He left his son William there. William served as deputy surveyor and established a small farm. James returned to North Carolina. In the winter of 1787-1788, he disposed of all of his land holdings in North Carolina. He left with his family to resettle in the Cumberland area. On the waters of the French Broad River, now in what is now Hawkins County, Tennessee, a critical decision was made of how to proceed. They decided to take the water route to reach the Cumberland settlement. They built large flatboats on the Holston just below Long Island to take the parties down the river and through the Chickamauga towns. The Chickamauгans, which were a part of the Cherokee Nation, were desperate to protect their communities and their homes against white encroachment and to protect their culture. Brown, 2 grown sons, James and John, 3 hired men, 5 other men, Mr. Baddies, John Flood, John Gentry, William Gentry, and John Griffin, and a Negro man. Mrs. Brown, 3 small sons, 4 small daughters, an old woman who was the mother of one of the hired men, 2 or 3 Negro slave women, all left. They left on the 4th of May. A party of about 22 people descended the French Broad and Tennessee rivers. On the 8th of May, they stopped at Chickamauga town and were visited by the headman of the town, who was also headman of Tuskegee Island town. His name was Cuddy-a-Toy, and 3 other warriors. Now, Tuskegee town was where the famous Cherokee chief Atacama had been headman. Cuddy-a-Toy's name, if you can imagine how native names can be corrupted very easily by English speakers. So these are some of the variants. His name meant fawn killer, so I'm going to use that name. It's easier than trying to use the other names, unless you're Cherokee. On the 9th of May, they came into view of Running Water Town and Nickajack Town. So you're talking kind of west-southwest of present-day Chattanooga. They were at that point. They were approached by 4 canoes under white flags. A mixed group of Cherokee and Creek, guided by a half-breed Cherokee man named John Van, approached them. The party rifled through the family's possessions. One Cherokee grabbed one of the younger sons, Joseph, who was age 15. The father came to his son's aid. A fight began, and the father was killed with a sword and fell dead into the river. The flatboat was turned into the mouth of the creek at Nickajack Town, which was on a higher bank than common and had only been settled about 3 years. Several of the Upper Town warriors took brown slaves as spoils. The Creek warriors took Mrs. Brown, her son George, who was 10, and 3 small daughters. They immediately left for their towns on the Tallapoosa River. Living at or near Nickajack was an old Irishman. He was a trader named Thomas Tunbridge, who was a British deserter during the Revolutionary War. He had been there about 16 years. He was married to a white woman who was French named Polly Millette, who had been taken prisoner near Mobile as an infant, but ended up with the Cherokees. Later, she refused to be exchanged and chose to remain with the Cherokee. She had had a Cherokee husband, and by him a son, now age 22. The son's name was Kiachatli, or Job, the French woman's son. And he shows up in a lot of Cherokee treaties. Kiachatli wanted to present his mother with a boy as a slave. He was one of the leaders of the attacking party and was rapidly rising as a leader. Kiachatli took Joseph Brown to the house of his stepfather, Tunbridge, about a mile away. If you think this behavior is harsh, how would you react if somebody engaged in a home invasion on you? That's how the Cherokee saw this. There were people invading their homes. There are different forms of slavery. There's indentured servitude, which can be voluntary or involuntary. You serve for a period of time. There is involuntary hereditary life servitude. That is what we tend to think of. You were born into slavery and you're a slave your entire life, and your descendants are slaves. Within the Cherokee culture, traditional slavery was a captive of war. You were captured in war and you were a slave. I don't know if it was hereditary. I don't think it was. I'm not seeing any proof of that. If you note that Kiachatli was the son of a captive or enslaved white woman, she chose to stay with the Cherokee. So she considered herself part of that culture. So there are lots of different nuances to slavery than what we are used to. While at Tunbridge's, Joseph heard the sounds of the remaining members of his family and the party being killed. An elderly Cherokee woman came to Tunbridge's and said the boy must also be killed. He was too large to be allowed to live. In 2 to 3 years, he would be a man, would learn the towns and escape and return and come back with an army to kill them all. Her son was Fawn Killer, the head man of Tuskegee Town. He came shortly to kill the boy. Tunbridge said that the boy was the property of Kiachatli, who would revenge the loss. Fawn Killer was described as a very large and strong man and was incensed. Tunbridge stepped aside and the chief took the boy. The wife, Polly Millette, then said, "Will the brave chieftain kill the boy in my house? Let not the boy's blood stain my floor." They took the boy with the goal of taking him to Running Water Town to kill him, but stopped after about 300 yards. Fawn Killer had claimed the brown slaves and didn't want to lose them to Kiachatli. This greatly displeased Fawn Killer's mother. He and his party left. 2 to 3 days later, Joseph Brown was taken to Nickajack by Tunbridge and presented to a chief named the Breath. He was the old headman, had gone off to Stokely Town, about 16 miles from Nickajack. The headman of Nickajack and Running Water was the Breath. The Breath said Brown would be killed if he was not attached to a Cherokee family. Relations in Cherokee are maternal there through a clan. And his clan, the Breath, was one of the strongest in the nation. He would receive Joseph, directing him to call Breath his uncle and Job or Chiakatali brother. The Breath adopted Joseph Brown into his family and clan. Chiakatali was made his adopted brother. Otherwise, he would have been killed. Brown saw his sisters, Jane, age 10, and Polly, age 5, who had been taken back from the Creek Party by the Cherokee. However, his mother Jane and his brother George and sister Elizabeth were still in possession of the Creeks. This was May 1788. In June of 1788, more hostilities broke out between whites and Cherokees, initiated by the murder of Principal Chief Oldhassel. That fall, most of those at Nickajack moved off for the winter. Old Tunbridge moved to Crowtown, about 30 miles below Nickajack. October 1788, Cherokee, led by John Watts, who was one of the main Chickamauga chiefs, attacked Fort Gillespie, which was near Knoxville. The sister of Captain Gillespie was captured. Joseph Sevier and Martin forces responded by going into Cherokee Nation, destroying towns. They took captives, including the daughter of the then principal chief, Little Turkey, who lived in northeast Alabama, kind of north of Gadsden, at what is still called Turkeytown. Sevier had taken a town on the Coosa River, and there would be an exchange of prisoners shortly. The exchange of prisoners was to happen in the spring of 1789. All the whites in the Cherokee Nation were to be sent to Little Turkey. Joseph Brown and his two sisters were sent to Running Water Town. The next day they were taken to Coosawhattie Town, where the exchange of prisoners was to take place. About the end of April, 1st of May, 1789, Joseph and these two sisters were sent to South Carolina to live with relatives. Mrs. Jane Brown had been taken to a Creek town. In that town lived the sister of the Creek chief, Alexander McGilvery. She was married to a French trader named Durant. Mrs. Durant aided Mrs. Brown to escape to Chief McGilvery, where she stayed. McGilvery found the daughter, Elizabeth, age 7, in an Upper Creek town, purchased her release, and returned her to her mother. He, however, could not arrange the release of the last son, George. In November 1789, McGilvery treated with the U.S. Jane and Elizabeth were sent to South Carolina to her other children and her elder son, William. In 1791, she and her freed children moved to their Cumberland, Tennessee land holdings near the mouth of White Creek. 1792, September the 30th, a party of Creek, Shawnee, and Cherokee attacked Buchanan Station, which is near Nashville. Joseph Brown came to the scene the next day and saw the body of his Cherokee brother, Chiakatali. The problems and tensions between whites and Cherokees continued and escalated. September 1794. White pioneers self-funded an attack on Running Water Town and Nickajack Town. Their guide was a 21-year-old young man who had lived among the Cherokee. His name was Joseph Brown. Great bloodshed. 70 Cherokee men were killed, women and children were taken captive, and the town was burned to the ground. Among the Cherokee dead was the Breath. The words of Fonkeller's mother, he was too large to be allowed to live. In 2 to 3 years, he would be a man. He would learn the towns and escape and return and come back with an army to kill them all. Soon after, his brother George Brown was finally released from the Creek custody. October 1795, Joseph accompanied General Robertson to Tellico, where he saw a mixed-blood Cherokee named Charles Butler, who was the nephew of Chiatapathy. 1813, the Creek War. Joseph Brown was asked by Andrew Jackson to lead the Cherokee regiment. He did not, though. Instead, he served as an aide, guide, and interpreter to General Roberts. During the war, Brown again saw Charles Butler, who was serving in Captain George Field's company of Cherokee. Brown learned that Fonkeller was still alive. He was now living on an island in the Tennessee River near the mouth of Elk River. And there were many descendants of the Brown slaves taken in 1788. General Jackson ordered the military to seize the slaves from Fonkeller and take them to Fort Hampton, 15 January 1814. Brown continued the slaves were his property under the Treaty of Hopewell. Fonkeller claimed them as his spoils under the 9th article of the Treaty of the Tellico Treaty of 1798. Legally, Fonkeller was correct. However, Brown prevailed due to the military presence. Brown did allow Fonkeller to keep one male slave. You think this is where the story ends. Events in real life don't resolve this way. And they don't resolve in the timing we expect. The slaves were valued among members of the Brown family over and over. Fonkeller in 1815 filed a claim for the loss of his slaves. He gave their names and ages. The Cherokee agent, returned Jonathan Meggs, agreed with the validity of Fonkeller's point. If you've ever had any discussions with African Americans, it is very common. Most of them will say that they have Indian ancestry. In his claim, Fonkeller stated, all the children and grandchildren, descendants of Sarah, who was the female slave, are mixed blood. Their fathers are Cherokee. I've probably read 10,000 Cherokee claims and thousands of letters and thousands of reports. I've never seen once a Cherokee admit that there were slaves who were the descendants of Cherokee. I can't prove it, but I think the children were his. I think she was one of his wives. Not a concept that we think of relative to slavery, but he didn't view them as slaves. He continued impressed. He petitioned the government. About 1816, Fonkeller died. His widow, his Cherokee widow, Eluja, continued the effort. Their son, whose name was Ahama or Hammer, also pressed the case. He continued and continued the effort. the Treaty of 1817. Lucha, who was a widow at this time, registered for a reservation on the north side of the Tennessee River next to John Thompson, which was about an hour's from the North Shore. It joined Jack Thompson on the north side of the river. However, in 1820, she married the principal chief of the Cherokee Nation, Pathkiller, and left and moved to Turkeytown. In 1827, Pathkiller died. Lucha and Bahama moved to Georgia. In 1837, Bahama, under the Treaty of New Echota, filed another claim for the matter of Susan's descendants. There's no evidence he was ever able to locate any of them. He even filed a claim for the reservation and failed. In 1834, Mrs. Jane Brown died. The Brown family pressed their case for additional compensation. There were multiple bills introduced in Congress. No evidence they were ever compensated. Choices and decisions and actions have consequences. The Brown family and those who were on their boat had no happy ending. The descendants of the slave woman, Susan, had no happy ending. The Breath and Keachula, the two who saved Joseph Brown's life, had no happy ending. The Chickamaugas, looking to preserve their homes and their culture, had no happy ending. The people at Buchanan Station had no happy ending. The people at Nickajacktown had no happy ending. There are choices, there are decisions, and there are consequences. There is no happy ending to this story. Thank you. So there are probably questions, so feel free. If I don't know the answer, I'll tell you.
Was it common for a small party like that to go off down a river to go to a boundary land?
Well, there were, let me go back. So if you look, so you come down the river. They chose to come down the river and to take the Nickjack Trail up. That was what their plan was.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of at Knoxville taking Avery's Trace across the mountain, they thought this was going to be an easier path. And they were told, you shouldn't do this.
They were told you shouldn't?
Yeah. People said, you know, this is the Cherokee, the Chickamaugas are too upset over things going on. It's not the wisest course.
Mm-hmm.
So you make a cavalier decision and think you're immune to consequences. You're not.
You know, I just remember, you know, all of us.
I've heard stories, yeah. I had
You know,
ancestors who supposedly came down the Tennessee River on flatboats.
Yeah, but I mean, you know, you think of the wagon trains going out west for mass protection. And so this would be a very small party.
Yeah, 22 people.
Yeah.
You know. But you, as the best thing I think I can compare it to today is a home invasion.
Right.
You feel like somebody's invading your home? Yeah, you're going to defend yourself.
Yeah.
And there's nothing to apologize for. So it's a sad story. I wish I could end it on a very happy ending, but not all stories are meant to be happy, and the truth sometimes isn't a pretty little story. There is no shiny paper and bow on it. So there are lots of stories among the Cherokee that, just like this is not the only one. It just happened to touch a lot of people. Several principal chiefs were affected, their wives. If I knew how to do African American genealogy, I would love to trace the ancestors of those 20 different enslaved people who were spread around. But I'm skilled at Cherokee research, not African American genealogy. I understand it, but I'm not at all skilled. Yes, ma'am.
The Avery's trace, the way they were going to go, was that like an established route that
It was a
was
known
like okay by treaty or
But you're going up and
something?
over mountains.
But I mean,
So-
it was an established
Right.
okay way.
Oh, was it okay? That would have been a safe path
Okay.
to take, albeit physically harder to go up and over mountains.
Okay, so it was physically harder enough that
Physically than riding a boat.
is, okay.
Yeah, this part of Tennessee is
Mhm.
more flat land.
Right.